Good afternoon. Welcome to the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technologies April 2022 webinar on secure automation. Digital workers are people too. We'd like to thank our sponsor, SailPoint, for sponsoring this event. And our sponsors always keep our material free and available to the general public. My name is Joyce Hunter, and I am the Executive Director for the Institute for Critical Technology, ICIT, a cybersecurity think tank. And as I mentioned before, welcome to the Secure Automation. Digital workers are people too. ICIT publishes objective, nonpartisan, and vendor-agnostic research to cultivate a cybersecurity renaissance that will improve the resiliency of our nation's 16 critical infrastructure sectors, defend our democratic institutions, and empower generations of cybersecurity. During this briefing, we will learn from some of the experts on secure automation and educate attendees on how they can begin their journey to leverage this transformative capability. Attendees will earn one continuing professional education, CPE, for attending this educational briefing. Now on to the actual briefing summary. Digital workers amplify human potential, and digital and human workers working in collaboration amplify your organization's potential. While there is some discomfort with digital workers are improving human workers' well-being by taking over tasks, allowing for reskilling employees. A recent study indicates that work-life balance is a key driver for SOC. Analyst burnout. Implementing digital workers may help alleviate the overwork leading to burnout. Thus, a meaningful tool for leaders to consider adding to their repertoire. In this ICIT briefing, a panel of experts will share their perspective on creating a seamless interaction between digital and human workers to maximize your organizational performance. Our panelists will discuss current trends in digital worker usages, how digital workers are interacting with human workers, and opportunities for the future. Our panelists are Ron Thompson, Associate CIO for Transformation and the Chief Data Officer for NASA. Sean Wang, the Technical Monitor for the Office of the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Energy. Frank Bugaglio, Public Sector Strategist for SailPoint. And I am Joyce Hunter, your ICIT Executive Director. So, gentlemen, let's start the conversation with defining digital worker. In the past, this meant to the employee digital skills. However, in this evolved area, we are discussing the workflow of that digital worker. With that being said, what is your definition of digital worker? And we'll start with Sean.
Can you hear me?
Sean, yep, we can hear you.
I'm sorry you cannot see me because my computer constraint. So my understanding of a digital worker is just like a human being, but it's more like automated agent, but without a really the physical character of a human being. I think the difference between a digital worker is and RPA type of automation is that a digital worker can actually really take a task from end to end. I think I use the analogy like Siri for iPhone, right? And all you need to do is just give the order, and the digital worker will take it away, and even doing research as well as performing tasks.
Okay. Frank, what is your definition of digital worker?
Sure. Digital workers can be attended and unattended. They're automated, software-based tools, applications, or agents that really perform a business task or process similar to a human user. They typically use AI or other autonomous decision-making capabilities. You know, artificial intelligence is an example. A chatbot might be an example. Machine learning can be an example. So, I think the key here to take away is digital workers are people too, as we have in our title. And that, they act, smell, sniff, they pass a lot of the same sniff tests that a human worker does, but there are some differences, and we'll be getting into those a little bit later.
Absolutely. And there are no 1099s associated with them, are there?
No, there's not.
Ron, you're over at NASA. I am sure that you have plenty of use cases of a digital worker that performs all kinds of tasks at your organization. What is your definition from being at NASA?
Sure. Well, thanks, Joyce. It's good to see you. Sean, Frank, it's good to be on the panel with you today, and thanks for having me on. We describe our digital transformation as digital as a lever for transforming the organization. So we're transforming our workforce, and workplace. So we'll focus now on the question about sort of the workforce and the digital worker itself. I would argue, in the past 2.5 years, we all are digital workers, right? We all have learned to adopt a new way of working, through. And 2 years ago, Joyce, we probably would have done this in person. It wouldn't have been an option for a virtual option, right? So we have digital tools and digital ways of working. But we at NASA are really transforming our not only our workforce, making it more modern, using modern tools, because our senior leadership knows we have to transform, knows we have to deliver on a pace that we haven't been able to deliver before. The pace of delivery, our launches are still continuing, right? In fact, they're increasing. So with our commercial partners, so we know we have to transform. We have to do things not like we've done in the Apollo program or through the shuttle ages. We have to really transform, and that pace of delivery is really increasing. So we do have to bring new tools to the table. So our senior leadership knows that transformation must occur, and then our new workers that join us are demanding for that transparency, are demanding for digital tools. We like to say from apps to maps, right? To really going from, you remember the trifold maps we used to have, call AAA, yeah. You get a triptych, and now all that stuff is just on your device. So that transformation from the new worker, the millennials and the Gen Zs coming in, they demand it, right? So it's really, what do we do with sort of the middle, right? What do we do with it? And that's really the organizational transformation we're doing. But I would argue all organizations are transforming into a digital worker, and sandwiched in from the need of the organization and from the demands of the new folks coming in, younger folks coming in, really demanding how we work. So we're seeing that squeeze, we're seeing that pace of delivery increase, and we're seeing our digital tools being one of the factors that will take us there to meet these demands.
Piggyback on what Ron just said, Frank. Tell me the differences between the human and digital workers for task completion, because I can imagine that the Mars rover is a digital worker, right? I mean, we don't have people, running around collecting samples and sending the data back to NASA. So, and so that's clear. I mean, we know specifically what the delineation is between human and the digital worker in that particular case. What are some other differences between human and digital workers, Frank, for task completion or processes?
Well, I think, one of the interesting things about digital workers when we're talking about, robotic process automation, right? There's a lot of similarities. And the differences really are how we manage their access. And unfortunately, it's been an untethered environment. And that's why I felt that this panel and this conversation is, kind of germane, and it needs to be had. Where, we have seen in the past digital workers being created unmanaged. We don't have centralized visibility of their access. And when we think of the human counterpart, we track that person from day one. We assign them a role as an employee or a contractor. We grant them access. We probably should be and hopefully are recertifying that access. These kinds of things aren't happening with digital workers, and that was one of our big impacts. Was a bank that came to us with the same problem. So when we look at digital workers, I think the big differentiator is they have access potentially to more things than a human might have access to. When we think of, I connect to the VA to check my benefits. That person has, or that chat, digital worker has to know who I am. They have to authenticate me, validate me. Then they have to connect to my, this might be banking as well. Think of all the things it has to do just to get to your account. Then it needs to get into your system and find out those fine-grained things about Frank that I'm asking about. Those are entitlements. And that same digital worker might do that in 20, 40, 50 different applications. So how do we know when something goes awry with that digital worker? So that's, part of the challenge, and part of the big differentiator is we load these things with a lot of entitlements and a lot of privileges, many more than human, and they're not under the same control.
So following up on that statement and the question, Sean, tell me how you are using or considering using digital workers at Energy.
At Energy, actually, I'm not sure how much you know about Department of Energy. We are really, I consider that as a research institution. So we have 18 labs. So we do a lot of research each year. So therefore, we manage a lot of contracts. So managing contracts is very expensive, in fact, and each year we have to close so many contracts. So closing contracts are very mundane and boring process. So the department spends millions of dollars just to close contracts each year. So one of the things we're in the middle of doing is to try to automate the contract closeout process, starting with something simple like a P card, purchase card, and contract closeout. So and that, I think, by automating that, we actually gain efficiencies on process standardization first, right? And then we can, once we define that, we can actually figure out what to automate, what not to automate, and also go back and to review our policies. As it stands right now, the department actually has policies in place and granting certain authorities to contract officers nobody else can do. So by introducing digital workers, we need to relook at that, see whether we can actually we need to change our policy to grant the authorities to digital workers. So introduction of digital workers, I think, has a lot of impact on both business processes as well as policy and technology itself. And of course, the efficiency we gain from the digital worker is enormous because they can work day and night and close the accounts and very efficiently instead of taking many nights and days to close them out.
So let me ask this. You mentioned, Sean, policies, procedures, and processes as it goes into having these digital workers onboarded, so to speak. So do your agencies, Ron, I'm going to go back to you. Does your agency have governance around these digital workers?
Yeah, I think if you look at sort of the autonomous and you look at a digital worker that's a human, right? So we have autonomous guardrails for, if you look at NASA, we're not only space, right? Space is important, launches are important, but we're also aeronautics, right? We're also, in addition to human exploration, we're also scientific and mission research, right? So we have these autonomous guardrails in which we make sure that we have a governance structure in place. We make sure we work with our stakeholders to make sure, all right, what are those, how should those autonomous vehicles actually work? What guidelines should they be flying in, for example, if you do or advanced air mobility? I mean, if you really take the Jetsons, so Joyce, what I like to say is, I'm living my childhood cartoons, right? If you look at the Jetsons and see flying cars, and that's sort of what I'm alluding to, is we do need some governance around autonomous vehicles, you know, our flying cars, you know, when George Jetson leaves and forgets the lunch and the lunches. So if you look at all that, that stuff is really coming to fruition. It's really coming to life. So we do have a governance structure put in place. Around this area, though, I really want to sort of riff on Frank's comment earlier about RPA. One of our transformation targets is really to transform our operations. And really, we're optimizing and synchronizing our work environment to increase efficiencies and effectiveness, right? So RPA is really, really yielding a lot of and that's through our governance process that we have these controls in place. We're automating manual work through RPA, and that's really showing huge promises. In fact, NASA's a leader across government in this area. And then also AI ML. I'll wait a little bit, hold that story back a little bit later in our chat, Joyce. Just remind me about the AI ML chat. But yes, it is through our governance body, and then we're setting up a really new governance model in partnership with our OCIO and our digital transformation efforts on how we implement and provide guidance for our organization, both internally and externally.
So Ron, I guess Rosie the robot on the Jetsons would be a digital worker.
Well, I got a digital worker in my other room working right now. One would argue, I got a Roomba vacuum in there just doing a map of the room. So yeah, you can look at that. And you know, you mentioned the robotics missions. Yes, there have been robotics missions for years with our partnership with JPL. And you know, we have Perseverance. You know, we have a helicopter right now flying on Mars doing these robotic images. We have scan of the moon right now. So when we land our Artemis mission there. So there are things that are working off planet that are actually autonomous, that are considered a digital worker as well. But that all works from programming from a human being, right? So you know, it really hasn't evolved to self-learning yet and writing its own code and own algorithms. So you know, we do control that through our governance. We do control that through our partnerships and where we have our delivery side of our house actually doing that in our missions. So.
Sean, both you and Ron have highly sophisticated scientific programs and projects within both of your agencies. But for Department of Energy, it really can be an effective tool for your back office operations. Have you started using this tool in your back office, not only in main energy, but also throughout your labs?
Yes, we have. Actually, we have implemented some RPA solutions within the Office of CFO, and by automating our financial reports, that's to Treasury on a monthly basis, and also managing some of the interagency agreements and funds processing. So I understand. It's also my understanding the labs are doing the same thing. They are also working on the AI side, more going beyond just a regular RPA. So yeah, we are still, I would say, at the infancy stage in terms of developing digital worker or solutions, fully, especially with intelligent RPAs. But as I mentioned earlier, our current focus is trying to focus on the enterprise-wide processes, such as contract closeout, and gain efficiency out of that. and prove that, I think, to the program offices, the value that we get out of the RPA solution. So before moving to more advanced intelligent RPA solutions.
Okay. Frank, if we're talking about transferring authority to a digital worker, what kind of policies do you think are needed to effectively manage that access? And should it be the same policy as with human workers?
Yeah, exactly. In Sean's use case of the financial management report is a completely perfect 100% example of how we have to have those identity governance controls on access, right? Just like we would have for that human that would have access to the financial management system. We would have a least privilege policy on that person before they even got access to the financial management system. We would probably have a separation of duties policy on that person as well. And then we would have a suitability policy. And to Ron's point, we have to control the behavior as well. And we have to understand that. So just like we do for the human counterparts, where we need to understand the visibility, we have to have visibility of what that RPA has access to within, call it the financial management system. What other access does that RPA have specifically that's generating those reports and processing those reports? Is it an overexposed RPA, just like I could be an overexposed human or overprivileged or over-entitled human, right? So all of these same controls that we use around our identities come into play here when we're putting this in the perspective of ICAM and these things being our human counterparts in the environment. It becomes very critical, and there's even more. From an industry perspective, identity management, identity governance tools are great at, hey, contractors, employees, guests, mission partners. We've had these classifications for a long time. Service accounts. We've added a new one, and it's RPAs. It's a new integration that we have. It's a new relationship that, as an identity vendor, we're now partnering with the RPA management vendors to be able to apply these controls. So absolutely, it's something that we need to have that same enforcement and visibility, compliance control that we have on our human counterparts.
I'm going to broach a question. So does zero trust apply to the digital workers? This question is for all of you. What is your opinion? What are your thoughts? Ron?
I'll let Ron and Sean go from their agency perspective and then chime in at the end.
Yeah. All right. Let me hold that for a second, but I want to sort of add to Frank's discussion about ICAM real quick, and then jump into zero trust. Really, if you look at this in the heart, the digital worker is a program that executes on behalf of a specific role and how it's programmed, right? And we do need controls on that digital worker as we would a physical worker. So Frank, you eloquently made that point. So we're really not, and control and visibility, I think, is the key, right? So we have that on our human asset. Myself, human asset, when I log in, I know that when I log into a government computer, everything I do will be tracked. There's a logging function for it as well. So that must work the same way with an RPA or some type of AI machine learning algorithm that goes and does its job and comes back. So we do need those same like controls. I think folks tend not to think about the program as sort of an entity, and it really has a security vector, right? It really has a way that it can be exploited, right? It really has a way that it could do exfil for information out, right? And so I think we really have to I think of this in a different way than we have been in the past. So that's the ICAM point, Frank. You really did a good job going over that, and I thought that was fantastic. To us, Joyce, zero trust is, I look at that as not only for digital worker, digital transformation, but from a data perspective as well, a key to how we secure our data, the root of what this is, what this will provide. Trust no one, build security around the trust no one, and have the controls in place to make sure that all the information is protected accordingly. So we're seeing that in our roadmaps, in our technology roadmaps for not only our IT services that we bring to the agency, but our transformation levers that I mentioned earlier. A key part of building all these out is to have a secure zero trust architecture and scale that throughout the enterprise. So that is a dependency, it's an imperative, it's a requirement that we have that.
Okay, great. Sean?
So, well said, Ron, and I definitely agree with what you said, and also what Frank talked about ICAM. The way that I see how this applicable to zero trust is that a digital worker is just like a human being, and all the controls, especially in the area of identity management as well as applications, right? The way I look at a digital worker is just very close to an application. So a human uses the application, a digital worker actually, you could consider that the application using another application, right? So all those zero trust and controls, I think, need to be implemented or to digital workers as well. And I see some challenges down the road, even with digital worker, in terms of how authorization rights are granted, because the zero trust requires in the future, and not now, a dynamic authorization. So it's no longer, they no longer promote role-based authorization, because nowadays majority applications are really role-based, not attribute-based authorization, and as well as some of the specifications in the implementation plan requires immutable deployment. So we all look at it for digital workers, it's going to be the same thing. And how do we figure out immutable digital workers when we deploy them? So there are many things that will have impact, I think, in the zero trust implementation plan on our digital worker implementation down the road.
That's interesting, because most of you probably know about the ATO process and how painful that is for a lot of people within the agencies. Will that, you're talking about, zero trust and the immutable issues that you'll have to deal with going in the future. What about ATOs? This is for anybody who wants to take that on.
Before we jump onto that, I'd like to add on to Ron and Sean's comments on the last question.
Sure.
One of the things about zero trust, and I'm seeing this, from an eye through the lens of ICAM, right? And the ICAM community has been preaching identity is the center, identity is the new perimeter for quite some time, even before zero trust became a kitchen conversation. One of the other things that's kind of interesting about zero trust is there's this concept of dynamic authorization, and that the role is dead. Everything's attribute based, everything's dynamic. Well, one of the things that we're proving out in a lot of the zero trust MVPs we're working on across the federal, civilian, and Department of Defense is that there is still the requirement for the concept of something like a role, especially the way dynamic authorization works. So there's still the ability to have the process and workflow and abilities to define access through with identity governance controls. But what's being provisioned might not be an entitlement that goes into the actual application, right? Zero Trust, we're moving the control to the application or the data itself, and we're comparing attributes. Well, how we're marrying up what that person should be able to do may be an entitlement or role that they got through, let's say, an identity governance request, SOD interrogation, all these things. But what we're passing, instead of a bundled group or provisioning an entitlement, we're sending an attribute that says data analyst 1, and that is what's being used at runtime in with all of the other acts or the other attributes that are being evaluated. And that's critical, because going back to the compliance question, right, and the audit question, the ATO question, how do we do that? How do we prove to our auditors, right, at any given time who has access if we're saying it's all granted dynamically? Well, what you're handing the auditor at that point is a query that said, yeah, we'll have to query 12 different systems to tell you who had access on any given time. And wait a minute, the values may have changed over time. And that's where we go back to that identity piece, laying that visibility over time of how access was obtained, granted, and removed, most importantly, when it's no longer needed. And that's another challenge with Zero Trust and dynamic authorization is you grant it, how do you remove it? So all these play into all these different things when we're talking about RPA management. I think RPAs have a huge piece in Zero Trust, and I think Zero Trust is actually, because RPAs are also, not just RPAs, they're connecting to the same APIs that are being leveraged. And all of these have that nature of having access and what can they actually do and who's using them. So it's a very intertwined complexity to get to that ATO and who you have to prove to.
Yeah, I tell you, Frank, the way you describe the dynamic aspect of access is something we cannot do manually. So in ICAM right now, it's largely, you have improofing, you have a validation step, you have a period in there that you have access to, but largely that's a manual way of doing that work, right? And dynamic access, you can't do that manually. There are not enough people, right?
Right, absolutely.
To do it manually. So we do need a way to say, yeah, and I go always back to the root of why you have security anyway. It's protect the data, Frank. So so hey, you're protecting that asset. Let's just say that, and you're protecting that asset. I may need access to that because I'm read in the program for this period of time. I may take another role, and it looks like both Sean and my titles have changed since you guys have had it, by the way, in our introduction.
Me too, by the
way. So there's an attribute change that we just had. It just changed. So when we take another job, I may not need to see that information in there. And then how do we put automation in here through the Zero Trust? I would say sausage grinder. And this goes back to ATO, Joyce, your question as well. So how do we put that automation in to do the right controls at the right time? And not that it's a compliance or satisfying an auditor, Frank, that's important. But at the end of the day, we're making sure our programs are protected, our projects are protected, our agencies are protected. So that's why we do it. So let's talk about ATO just for a couple seconds. And Sean, I invite you to jump in on this one as well. ATO in a simplistic form is a checklist to make sure we're protecting our infrastructure, our programs, our data, right? Really well-intended, needed, absolutely need that validation. We need that step that we're protecting our programs and systems, right? But right now, again, it's a manual step, right? We require a lot of support, a lot of resources to go down and do these inspections, right? There's talk about, once something is basically ATO'd, we should be sharing ATO'd. So, but you have the old, thought, trust but verify, right? So what is the right blend to this right now? I would say largely we're all suffering with things take too long to deliver, to program, to get out, to be impacting mission, right? We do need to speed this up, but we don't need to speed it up recklessly. We don't need to put it out without the controls in place, the proper governance, the proper oversight, the proper assurance that we have some type of acceptable risk to move forward. So I think we're learning, we're getting better. There's always room for improvement. But again, how do you do this? Just like, zero trust, how do you do this when we introduce, on the fly, on the fly work? So anyway, Frank, you really triggered a couple of synapses of thoughts right there. So thank you for that. So Joyce, hopefully I answered the ATO. It's a silver bullet thing, because I don't think there is. Each organization is different how we go after it. Cultures are different how we go after it. It may work in one organization and not in another. So we do have to be agile how we do this. But it is an area that we're noticing where we need to improve, and not that anybody's doing anything wrong. Again, good intentions, but really, how do we do this effectively? Not efficiently, effectively. So Sean, why don't you jump in? I know you've been out there. Right.
Thank you, Ron. Actually, you said it better than I do, I think. So I'm actually the AO, authorizing official for DOE CFO, and what you said was absolutely right, Ron. Is the current ATO process is very much compliance centric, right? So you check the box that whether we have done this, well intended, no doubt about it. So I think this zero trust will definitely have big impact on how we do ATO. So and getting back to Frank's point on the auditors audit, right? So how do you provide evidence and for certain things they're looking for? The way I look at it, I think the auditors need to look into the zero trust. They need to change their process for audit as well. I'm not sure they can rely on the traditional process of auditing and to see whether you are in compliance with certain things. So yeah, actually in CFO, we not only we need to make sure we are compliant with all the requirements of controls, right? There's controls and the things we need to do each year, and we also try to implement monitoring tools, because what I see more important is to implement monitoring capabilities in the IT environment to see whether to identify abnormal events, whether at the application level or the server level, and even certain controls to profile user behavior, application behavior, so we can build that intelligence to focus on the true threats instead of just the mundane things we have to do. Granted, I mean, we still have to address our vulnerabilities, right? Those kind of things, but I'm not sure doing that is adequate. I hope the zero trust requirements will change some of the practice we're doing today with vulnerability management. So off the topic a little bit.
Sean, that was spot on. And one of the reasons, I always question in some of the zero trust webinars that I participate in as a moderator or a panelist even, the the topic always comes up, and I still have not got a straight answer from the audit community on how they're going to address the differences in the controls that are related to, dynamic access, and how they're going to allow us to prove access on a certain time, certain date, because a lot of that goes out the window, and we haven't heard anything from the audit community on the impact of zero trust. I frequently, I Google once a month trying to see how that's going to change. I mean, our own, NIST doctrine has not changed yet. I'm sure it will. I mean, it has to,
Right.
and that will obviously affect the ATO process as well. So great to get your perspective on it, Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
So I'm going to throw another fly into the ointment. What about APIs? I mean, when
Yeah.
you're talking about interoperability, and let's go down that rat hole.
APIs are humans too. I mean, let's be realistic. Every vendor now has opened up their platform with APIs. We've done it. We can communicate just as if you're a human in the system. All the same functions across our platform are available via an API. So if that API has that access, what's calling that API? What controls do we have then on the API? Because obviously it's going to run as an authenticated user. I mean, at least in an identity solution, it should. But yeah, APIs can have that same access humans do. Again, and it's a lot of that, the access and the behavior is not visual to the human eye or even the SOC.
Right. Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Okay, so Ron, let's go back to you. Typically, digital workers are in HR, supply chain, or say at customer experience. Does NASA have examples of using digital workers outside of those tried and true and standard applications?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing really good work in those areas, right? Our supply chain, we actually had a meeting a week ago talking to our security folks about we have pockets of excellence in commerce, in NASA, and a few other agencies as well. But how do we share that information, right? We don't need to go and collect it once, use many is really what we're looking at. So that interoperability for that particular data set is really interesting. But there are two thoughts here, Joyce, and we just went to Space Symposium. I think it was last week. Everything's all a blur. We were in
2 weeks ago.
Colorado Springs, yeah. The week before that, I was at Kennedy watching we got to see a launch out there, so really exciting times.
Cool.
But at Space Symposium, NASA had a booth, and we were talking about all the great and wonderful things we do, as well as many other agencies and organizations, companies were out there. So in the booth, we actually had a pilot program we ran through our digital transformation effort. And we did this in partnership with our Johnson Space Center, and that's where all of our astronauts train. That's where space operations happens on station. So right now, all the astronauts that need to walk in space have to visually inspect the suit. The most wearable component of the suit is the glove. And we did a little pilot program that looked at historical images, probably 15, 20 years images of doing EVAs, and taking in, all right, what's a unused glove look like, a new glove, and then what is one that has a tear or rip or whatever. So we basically image, how the AI worked is it's image pattern recognition. And we did this in conjunction with Microsoft and HP. HP had an onboard compute system, and Microsoft helped us do the coding. So if you search for glove AI NASA, you'll see a bunch of articles that ran on this about a week ago. So what does it mean is we were spending many, many hours manually inspecting these images, as well as the astronaut would go through the glove, before he or she, does a walk. And then they would say, yes, this is fit for use, or hey, I need to go to my backup, right? What we saw was that that inspection time got down to seconds. I think we could do it in like 15 seconds, and the confidence interval was 99%. So we did this as a pilot. This is not operational yet, operational on board yet in station, but it's showing us great promise in how we can use automation. The digital worker, that AI algorithm to do that inspection. We're showing great promise in there for those routine tasks where we have a rich history of what is good and what is bad. So basic pattern recognition, that's how it works on an image, on a glove. Really exciting stuff. So if you haven't seen it yet, please do take a look at that article. It's really neat.
Cool. That sounds really like that sounds like almost getting to Star Trek type stuff.
We're getting there, George. We're not quite, and being the chief data officer, I'm not Brett Spiner, the data. So, but we're seeing great promise where we can have a lot of routine work that we do manually. A lot of that stuff can be automated right now. So very, very early, very, very promising though. What we're seeing on these, again, these confidence intervals are really key for us. So Frank, you mentioned, hey, how do you ensure, the quality is where it is? Through confidence intervals, basically. Are you working within those predictable paths, those guard lines?
Yep.
Are you in there? And then that's inspecting that would naturally be an auditable. Did it perform within the interval that you expected? Did it cross the barrier?
Absolutely.
This is Ron. There's a great lead in. So, Sean, what should leaders keep in mind when assessing the performance of their digital workforce?
That's a tough one because we have not gone that far yet, right? So we're still, as I said, still in the infancy stage with our digital workers, and performance-wise, and we have some challenges now with our what is called unattended bot. So we still have a policy within the department that we need to get over with in terms how to. This is about authorization and identity management. And currently, all our unattended bot are executed by a person. And because that lack of a policy or lack of a decision on that on digital workers. So performance-wise, based on the data we have received for the three deployed bots, so it's incredible. So especially for vendor refresh, each year we have to work with the vendor to actually get the new contractors and the company that are doing business with the department, and get the information from GSA and populate our acquisition systems. And with this with this RPA, we can run that anytime automatically. Never have to work with the pay vendor to do that at all, and can run anytime and very fast as well. So, I mean, we definitely get the benefit out of the digital worker for sure. So,
great. I understand we have a couple of questions, so I'm going to wrap up for all of you. What recommendations would you make to leaders? Whether it's in policy or not, but what are your recommendations to leaders considering implementing or governing their digital workers? And we'll start with Sean. We'll go Sean, Ron, and then Frank.
All right. I would say that the leaders in the agency, I think, need to relook at the policies and the process we have in place, and have open to innovative ideas, right? How to actually streamline the process, and with respect to the introduction of digital workers. So, because things have changed, then we need to have a new process in place to manage things more efficiently and effectively. That's on the policy side and the process side. And of course, on the technology side, and invest in technologies that can drive efficiency and effectiveness for the organization, and reward them and with the more reward the form for innovative ideas and implementations. Willing to support for process changes and policy changes.
Ron?
So Joyce, I would say embrace the change as a leader. Thing number one. This is coming. It's not a nicety. It's not a I have an option to do it or don't do it. We must bring in automation, right? And that's at the heart of this is really what we're talking about. So we must accept it. I would say thing two, start small, aim high. And you can't eat the elephant all at once. So you got to take one bite at a time, as the old saying goes. So start with it. And then thing three is have discussions like this, right? Have perspectives that aren't the same. So get that outside perspective, canvas that broad landscape. And they're really good areas of discussions happening across the federal space, the commercial space as well. So don't just make this about a GovCon discussion or government community discussion only. Have a wide net when you look at this. A lot of commercial companies are really doing some advancing work in this area, specifically around mining and data and everything. But recognize that it's not an option. Commit to it. Start small, aim high, and get on board.
Great. Frank?
I think my recommendations will come down at a little lower level. As we practically get the idea for an RPA or a bot or automation, I think we need to, have that proper oversight, determine the impact, really, right? What's this thing going to do? What's it going to touch? That enables us to really, look at the risk it's going to pose if something goes awry, but it also allows us to apply the appropriate controls around it. As Ron was talking about, the Jetsons driving around in cars or the maid, running around the house. That's one level of risk, right? But the RPA that Sean was talking about, accessing the financial management system, we might have to have a little bit more control over that. So we really need to assess the impact first and have oversight. And one of the most important things, something that came back to us was, and this came from the vendor community, that there was no ownership or sponsor assigned to the robotic process. So when something does go wrong, who's responsible for this thing out there performing as a human, right? And then validating really the access that's been assigned to it. And then the rest of it should come in with your natural controls of how you review access, how you review, behavior. right? When we put all this together. So that kind of, ties up the little pitch that these guys are, humans too. And we need to make sure that we are, taking all the same considerations we had for the human we're granting access to, and placing that where appropriate and applicable around the robotic process.
So as you all have eloquently alluded to, the textbook has not been written. So there's still a lot of room and space for a lot of the innovation and continuing conversation around the digital worker. And we appreciate all of your comments. And Catherine, I think you said we had a couple of questions.
We do. So looking at the time, I'm going to go with the question that ties in best with what we were just chatting about. And that is, what do you see as your top challenges in scaling your agency's digital workforce? What support and/or tools do you need to be successful?
So, Joyce, I'll jump in here. It's a good question. So it's really culture for us.
I'm on the webinar. I have this room reserved.
Oh, Frank, you got a hot mic, Frank.
Presenting.
Frank, can you mute him? So
Yeah.
really, sorry guys, it's really culture and embracing a new way of working, right? And I mentioned sort of that middle, right? It's really that middle culture of the organization that may not always realize that things do need to change. So culture eats strategy for lunch. Everybody's heard that. I definitely have lived that. Many of us have. So I would say that's thing one. And then what do we do about it, right? I think we need to educate, we need to train, we need to make sure that that it isn't a competition, it isn't a displacement of work for folks. So let the people know there are plenty enough jobs. It just may be different than what they've done in the past. So embracing that shift, that change management is really thing one. And we do it through, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. So that for us, that's really top of mind for us, is that culture, that middle of the stack that we need to be mindful of.
Okay, Sean and Catherine, would you repeat the question again?
Is that the same question or a different
Yes,
question?
same question.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to add to what Ron already covered. I think Ron covered more like on the human factor side and the process and impact. I think for us, the main challenges I sort of alluded to earlier is really the lack of a approved privileged access management solution. So for RPA, so we can actually really deploy those unattended bot and as unattended bot instead of actually simulating that by human. That's one area. Another challenge that I see is really the process standardization, because from the implementation of the bots we have in place, we found that quite often people are trying to simply automate the process they have in mind, the way they've been doing things, and not realizing that you could really gain efficiency by changing your process totally. Those are the challenges that I see. And for enterprise-wide processes, quite often you're getting on the same page from all the stakeholders is a challenge.
Frank, you'll close us out.
And please repeat the question. I'm sorry, I had someone interrupt me. They were trying to say I was in their room. Sorry. Again, the question.
What do you see as your top challenges in scaling your agency's digital workforce?
Yeah, and I think Sean and Ron just did a really good job at explaining that. You know, what we see is really how to get started. And then as these things start to get out there, how to control them. You know, and I think that's, and education. I mean, really, it's new technology. It has new impact to our environments, like we were talking about with Zero Trust. And, you know, just that alone, that whole environment, you know, is a change in how we look at security. So I think there's a lot of areas that are impacted by RPAs, and we're continuing to address them. And I would like to give some credit to GSA and the working groups that created the, you know, digital worker playbooks. So if you haven't seen them, I suggest looking at them. I'm sure that was done with agency input from the folks like we have here on the panel today, because they're great guides, both from an identity management perspective and just the digital worker process.
And I think all of you are right in this, that there are some challenges that we know, and there are some challenges that we don't know yet, because you know, this is not over. I think the conversation we should have is to continue the conversation, and leaders have to be wanting to help solve those problems and enable strategy, and not be the group that's just going to be there to get in the way or check some compliance boxes. We talked about the compliance. Now, in this area where operational technologies or IoT are involved, this can very often equate to security or safety. So ensuring your programs have the support, trust, and resources they need even becomes more critical. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Ron Thompson, Sean Wang, Frank Berguglio, and our sponsor, SailPoint, for having this presentation. And we look forward to seeing you at our next one. Thank you so much, and live long and prosper.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.